That's me. We might need another cord for my new headset. Good morning. So we are in the book of Daniel. We said last week we got through all the fun stuff, all the stories, the fiery furnace and this, and the lion's den and all that stuff. And now we're into the apocalyptic chapters. I have to say they're not my favorite parts of the Bible. But it's important to understand, okay, and I'll get into to explain why this is important later. But as you look into the apocalyptic, it's symbolism. It's just vast amount of symbolism. And so when you're reading the book of Daniel, any apocalyptic stuff, like I said before, apocalyptic just means revealing. That's why the book of Revelation is called Revelation. It's the revealing, right, of things to come. And then you read about all those things to come, and you're like, this is weird. But it's all symbolic, and it wouldn't have been weird to the ancient Near East when this stuff was written. This was common. They would have seen symbols. They had dreams, they had visions, and they would interpret all those things in wild signs to try and figure out what's going on in the unseen world that was going to affect the seen world and what was coming. And so when you get to chapter 8, it's going to move on from Babylon. So the last chapter, we had these 4 beasts, and each beast represented a different kingdom that was coming, starting with Babylon, then Cyrus and the Medo-Persian Empire, and then you have the Macedonian Greek Empire that comes, Alexander the Great comes later, and then there's this 4th one that we don't know for sure what it is, but it's probably still in the future. And then, so now we get it, and it's going to do some of the same things, different imagery, and it leaves out Babylon altogether. But as you start reading, if you want to open your Bibles, you can open it to chapter 8 of Daniel. And when you get to chapter 8 of Daniel, it starts off by dating when this vision was given to him. In the 3rd year of King Belshazzar's reign, I, Daniel, had a vision after the first one that I had already appeared to me. So last chapter was the first vision that he had. But this is King Belshazzar, so that's several kings after Nebuchadnezzar. And so Nebuchadnezzar comes in, and you have all these kings. Then you have Belshazzar, who's really second in command. His father, Nebuchadnezzar, is out basically fighting other wars and staying away from Babylon, the city of Babylon. And he puts his co-regent in charge. And in chapter 7, Belshazzar comes to an end because he's having a party with all the temple gold and plates and cups, and they're sacrificing and celebrating the gods of silver and gold. And then he sees this disembodied hand on the wall writing "Miny, miny, tinkle, tinkle." And that was, he didn't know what it was, and Daniel comes and interprets it and says, this night you're going to die, your kingdom is over. And the Medes and the Persians came in. They diverted the Euphrates River so they could walk right through the gates and, waist-deep water. Walked in, and the city didn't even resist because the armies just said, ta-da, here we are. And so they thought they were inconquerable, they're unconquerable, but they were conquered. He was put to death that night, and Daniel then is in charge again of a new kingdom. So Belshazzar, when this is written, Cyrus hasn't taken Babylon yet. This is going to the future. Now the thing is that a lot of the stuff that's in here, people don't believe. There are a lot of historians and scholars believe this can't have been written. Of almost all of your books, this one's doubted because of the accuracy of its historical prophecy. That it has these visions, and it lays out things that are so obviously things that actually happened hundreds of years after it was written that it can't have been. It just can't have been true. This have to have been written after these events happened, and then this vision was made up to pretend that it was predicting. But then they found Dead Sea Scroll in the caves where the Dead Sea Scrolls are, and found out well, that didn't work. It's at least as old as those. So it had to have been before some of the events that are in Daniel that actually predicts. So I'll get to some of these dates as we get through here. So in verse 2, he says, in my vision I saw myself in the citadel of Susa in the province of Elam. In the vision I was beside the Ulai Canal. I looked up, and there before me was a ram with 2 horns standing beside the canal, and the 2 horns were long. One of the horns was longer than the other, but the other grew up later. I watched the ram as it charged toward the west and to the north and to the south. No animal could stand against it, and no one could rescue it from its power. And it did as it pleased and became great. As I was thinking about this, suddenly a goat with a prominent horn between its eyes came from the west, crossing the whole earth without touching the ground. It came toward the 2-horned ram I had seen standing beside the canal and charged it in a rage. I saw it attack the ram furiously, striking the ram and shattering its 2 horns. The ram was powerless to stand against it. The goat knocked it to the ground and trampled on it, and none could rescue the ram from its power. The goat became very great, but in the height of its power, the large horn was broken off, and in its place 4 prominent horns grew up toward the 4 winds of heaven. Out of one of them came another horn, which started small but grew in power to the south and to the east and toward the beautiful land. It grew until it reached the host of heavens, and it threw some of the starry hosts down to the earth and trampled them. It set itself up to be as great as the commander of the army of the Lord, and it took away the daily sacrifice from the Lord, and his sanctuary was thrown down. Because of rebellion, the Lord's people, the daily sacrifice was given over to it. It prospered in everything it did, and truth was thrown to the ground. Then I heard the Holy One speaking. Another Holy One said to him, "How long will it take for the vision to be fulfilled?" The vision concerning the daily sacrifice, the rebellion that causes desolation, the surrender of the sanctuary, and the trampling of under feet of the Lord's people. And he said to me, "It will take 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary will be reconstructed." While I, Daniel, was watching the vision and trying to understand it, there before me stood one who looked like a man. And I heard a man's voice from the Ulai calling, "Gabriel, tell this man the meaning of the vision." Now this is interesting. Like, Gabriel's the man that he's seeing. Okay, so he hears a voice telling Gabriel, who looks like a what? A white being with big, flowery, flappy wings? No, the angels look like men in the Old Testament. That's how they look, all right? So then we go in verse 17. As he came near the place where I was standing, I was terrified and fell prostrate. "Son of man," he said, "understand that the vision concerns the time of the end." While he was speaking to me, I was in a deep sleep with my face to the ground. Then he touched me and raised me to my feet. He said, "I am going to tell you what will happen later in the time of wrath, because the vision concerns an appointed time of the end. The 2-horned ram that you saw represent the kings of Media and Persia. The shaggy goat is the king of Greece, and the large horn between its eyes is the first king. The 4 horns that replace the first one that was broken off represent 4 kingdoms that will emerge from this nation, but will not have the same power. The latter part of the reign, when the rebels have become completely wicked, a fierce-looking king, a master of intrigue, will arise. He will become very strong, but not by his own power. He will cause astounding devastation, will succeed in whatever he does. He will destroy those who are mighty, the holy people. He will cause deceit to prosper, and he will consider himself superior. When they feel secure, he will destroy many and take his stand against the Prince of Peace, Prince of Princes. That's actually Jesus. He will be destroyed, but not by human power. The vision of the evenings and the mornings that has been given to you is true, but seal up the vision, for it concerns the distant future. I, Daniel, was worn out, lay exhausted for several days, and I got up and went about the king's business. I was appalled by the vision, but it was beyond understanding. So, we're going to go back to the beginning here as we read the whole thing. Okay, so he gives the interpretation. What we know about this vision is that the ram is the Medo-Persian Empire, because that's what they say it's about. We don't actually have to figure that out. There are 2 horns. You've got Media and Persia. The Medes were the greater of the 2 kingdoms until Cyrus, actually, who was a Persian and a Media. His mother was from the Medes and his father was from the Persians. Grew great, took over the Medes Empire, and the Persia Medes Empire both combined, but the smaller horn, the Persians, became the bigger horn, right? And they trampled everything. They took over Babylon. They went all the way out. They tried to actually take Greece. They were all the way into Turkey. That's modern-day Turkey, right? And they've taken this huge empire, the Persian Empire, and then we know Alexander the Great quickly, in 12 years, took over everything of the Persian Empire. Literally destroyed the Persian Empire in 12 years, went all the way to India, went even further than the Persian Empire did. And so that's the symbolism of the ground, that the goat doesn't even touch the ground. That's how swift he is. He doesn't even have to touch the ground. So that's the quickness. And then while he was at the height of his power, the horn that broke off is the first king. That's Alexander the Great, dies when he's young. He dies in his 30s. He actually has 2 sons that are later murdered, but his kingdom, so they can't actually claim his kingdom. They end up 4 generals. So Alexander the Great had 4 generals. So when this happens, it's like 450 BC, 450 years before Christ, right? And these 4 generals come up, and they split up the kingdom. One takes Babylon, one takes Syria, another one takes Egypt, and another one takes the Roman side, the Greek and the Roman side. And so you have these 4 kings, and they're actually continuing with Alexander's vision for Hellenizing the entire ancient world, that they would all speak Greek, they would all, have Olympic-like games, they would worship all the Greek gods. That was their intent, right? So they wanted to make the whole world in the image of the Greeks. And that actually paves the way for the gospel, because that creates a common language for which the Bible's written is in Greek because of that. And the roads that them and the Romans built, all this paves the way so that when Jesus comes, everything's already laid out for the gospel to spread very quickly. Now, so when Alexander the Great dies, his 4 generals split up. There's the Seleucids and the Ptolemies. The Seleucids are the ones that take Syria, and the Ptolemies take Egypt. So you got Seleucid, one general, Ptolemies, another general. And they have generations of kings that take over, and the Ptolemies become the next Caesars, right? They're the Caesar, continuing the Caesars, even though they're Greek. They become Caesars. Not Caesars, pharaohs, all right? And in Syria, those 2 over generations begin to fight each other. So when you come down from Syria and you're trying to fight the Egyptians, who's in the middle? Yeah, Israel's right in the middle. So if the Ptolemies attack, they got to go through Egypt, and if the Seleucids attack, they go through Israel. So for a long time, so remember, this is around 450 BC that it starts. It is 150 BC where finally the Seleucid king that comes up, named Antiochus Epiphanes, what he does is he ends up taking over Israel. So they're not in the way anymore. He's just going to take them over. And they were not conforming. They didn't want to be like Greeks. And so he was going to force it. Now what he did was he was actually not in line to be king. His brother was the king of Syria, and he died. He had 2 sons that he had a son that should have become the king, but his brother, which is Antiochus Epiphanes, through conniving and deceit, convinced everybody that he should be the king, and he becomes famous for his conniving, deceitful ways to gain a lot of power. And the power becomes what people really want. They don't care whether people are honest or not. They just want to be behind the winner, right? That's kind of a human frailty. We want to get behind the winner. We don't want to get behind the loser, even if the winner is deceitful. And so the deceitful winner is out there enlarging his kingdom, and he's really successful at it. But then he takes Israel, and then he actually takes over the Ptolemies in Egypt, and then he comes back to Israel and fully takes over. And around 150 BC, he goes in and takes over the temple, and he takes out all the treasures and the altar and everything else, and he installs an altar in there for the Greek god Zeus. And he takes an artifact that's a holy relic. Zeus, some people think it's like a piece of a meteor that would come from Zeus, and puts that in the Holy of Holies, and that's what they're supposed to worship. And they try and make sure that the people are doing this. They're persecuting all the Christians for doing this. They were brutal. For Jewish people, like one of the things that separates all Jews from all the other people in ancient times is circumcision, right? So if you were a mother that circumcised your sons, they would hang your sons up while you watched and then kill you. So they were trying to end circumcision. They were trying to destroy the faith of the Israelites and everything else. And then north of Israel, you have one of the leaders, Antiochus's kingdom, is trying to force them to sacrifice a pig on an altar to Zeus. And he takes Matthias to sacrifice this pig. Now, Matthias is a Levitical priest. All right, he's from the priesthood. And he refuses. Now, this is where, if you're Catholic and you care about, you read your Catholic Bible, you have an advantage over Protestants. Because as soon as you get to the end of the Old Testament here, the last book of the Old Testament is what? Does anybody know? Malachi. We went through that a couple years ago, right? After Malachi in the Catholic Bible comes 1st and 2nd Maccabees. And 1st and 2nd Maccabees tell this story, that when this king did this, he started forcing all of the Jews to, they built actually a big stadium in there where they would have like games and everything else. And the Greeks, you know how they play their games with no clothes on, right? That was kind of horrifying to Jews as well. And so we're all going to watch naked people wrestle. Didn't want to do it, right? So trying to force all of this on the Jews. They're resisting, and so now they're trying to find leaders that will capitulate and join them. And so this leader from Syria comes down and says, Matthias, you're a priest. It's your turn to sacrifice this pig. And he refuses to do it. And another man comes out of the crowd and says, well, I'll be priest. I'll sacrifice a pig. It's a Jew. And so Matthias jumps up, throws the man on the altar, and sacrifices him instead. And he sacrifices the general that's trying to make him do it. And immediately, him and his 4 sons start guerrilla warfare against a much larger kingdom in Syria, the Seleucids, right? He's going to fight against them for their freedom. Now, there's this number, 23 evenings, 23 days. Like this is verse 14. It will take 23 evenings and mornings. Now, they don't know, this is 2,300, so 2,300. They don't know if this is 23 evening and morning sacrifices or if this is 2,300 days. Okay? And one of the reasons they have a hard time knowing for sure which it is, because depending on which way you look at it, when does the 2,300 days start, when do they end? So the 2,300 days could start when they were first taken over, before he went down to Egypt and everything, and then to the time that the temple was restored and they started sacrificing biblically, according to the law. Or it could be evening, morning sacrifice, and it actually starts from the time that Antiochus Epiphanes, I keep forgetting his name, and you guys know me. This is amazing that I can actually remember his name and none of yours. But so Antiochus Epiphanes is actually forcing them to sacrifice. From the time he raids the temple and starts sacrificing to the time of the end is exactly half that number, which would be 1,150 days for morning and evening, or evening and morning sacrifices. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which would be half as many days. And exactly to that, from the time he went in and took over the temple to the time that it was restored, would be, again, exactly half that number. So either number works. So we don't know exactly which it refers to. But the thing is, then what happens is, what you need to know if you're reading the book of Maccabees, the cleansing of the temple is how the Jews get Hanukkah. You get that from the book of Maccabees. And so the book of Maccabees is when they celebrate Hanukkah, because the abomination of desolation was removed. The sacrificial thing, the Zeus, was removed, and they cleansed the temple. There was a miracle, a festival of lights, where they had a miracle to make sure that the light could be stayed long enough so they could do their sacrifices. When they did this, then what happens is they're celebrating Hanukkah every year. That's a new festival of the Jewish people from that time forward. So it's about 150 years before Christ. All right? All of this is way far in the future to Daniel. But that's not all that's going on. So when you look at the passage, it talks about him waging war against the Prince of Princes. All right? And it talks about all of these heavenly things, and the man that translates for him or describes the whole thing. So if you drop down to 13, then I heard the Holy One speaking to another Holy One, said, how long will it take for the vision to be fulfilled? The vision concerning the daily sacrifice and the rebellion that causes desolation, the surrender of the sanctuary and the trampling of God's people. And he said to me, it'd take 2,300 days. But later on, when he gets this translation, it is, you look at verse 26, it says, the vision of the evening and mornings has been given to you as true, but seal up the vision, for it concerns the what? Distant future. And so there are parts of this passage that's indicating there's this unseen battle going on, which we know about, and Jesus talked about, that there's a battle against the heavens of those leaders of God's council that rebelled against him and wants to destroy humanity. Just an aside, it's because we are going to judge them. So let's destroy all the judges. That's our role later on, is to judge angels. And so that's why we are their enemy. Plus it bothers God that he would destroy, he hates everything that God loves, so destroy us. Now, when we go into this, we're looking towards the future. We're looking at all these things. It says the end times. Now, the nature of prophecies is they can be fulfilled multiple times. So you have like the very end of the book of the Old Testament in Malachi, it says that the time of the Messiah is coming, but who's going to come first? Elijah. Remember, so Elijah never died. He was carried off into heaven on a chariot of fire, right? And he's supposed to come back to proclaim the coming of the Messiah. And so when John the Baptist is born, the angel says to his father, he will come in the spirit of Elijah. It's not Elijah, but the spirit of Elijah, and he comes and proclaims the coming of the Holy One. Make straight his path. The Messiah is here. He announces his coming, right? But then when the disciples asked Jesus, I thought, they say that, how come they say that Elijah's coming? And Jesus says this interesting thing. Elijah did come. John the Baptist was Elijah, but not really Elijah. He came, but he says, I tell you, Elijah will come. So Elijah comes twice. He comes in the person of John the Baptist, and he actually comes back as Elijah when Jesus comes back the second time for his second coming. So there's two fulfillments of the prophecy of Malachi, and Jesus is explaining it. He came and he's coming, right? The prophecy of Jesus coming, right? Did he come? Is he coming once or twice? Twice. He comes the first time, he's coming the second time. And if you read all the Old Testament prophecies, there are some related to his first coming and some related to the second. The Jews didn't know this. They're just looking at all these prophecies for the coming of the Messiah, and they're trying to decipher, how is he coming? They can't tell. And like I said, this is really, really important when you're reading prophecies. Prophecies are not for you to figure out the future. You can't just figure out the future. That's not the purpose. The purpose is so that those who are faithful and those who believe, when the things are occurring, you'll go, oh, this is what God has said is going to happen. So when they're happening, you know that this is fulfillment of the prophecy. But knowing that is more important than just knowing that. Because remember what I asked you, what is the book of Daniel about? The sovereignty of God. He is the one who's in control. He makes kings, he knocks them down. He rises up evil kings, he will knock them down. Righteous kings, they come down. But God is always in control. So here you have these beasts that come out in the last chapter that come up, and they're terrifying and they're horrible and they're mankind, destroying mankind. And that one day there'll be a kingdom that's not evil. All right? And all of your concentration or evil happen to be biblically connected to political regimes. They're kings and rulers. And they destroy people, right? And people, for whatever reason, support these evil kingdoms and kings. And the ones that are always the worst are always super arrogant and blasphemous and boisterous and proud and arrogant, whatever, all that, right? So when we have all this, this is what we look for that type of leader. So it may or may not be any type of leader in your lifetime. It doesn't really matter. But when all of the things start happening, you wonder what is going on. And you look at the scriptures and say, oh, this is supposed to happen. It tells you God has been in control, he's still in control, and he will be in control. So it gives you hope that you're able to know that what you're going through, no matter what you're going through, God knows it's coming and he's got everything under control the whole time anyway. That's the whole purpose of the book of Daniel. Is like no matter how many terrible things come, because remember, the Jews were taken from their land in Judah, deposited in Babylon, persecuted, many of them then been murdered and everything else. And then God's message in Daniel, why they're there, is that he is one in control and it's okay. He's got you. And that you can continue to follow me. King wants to make a giant statue everybody's supposed to worship. Don't worship. Even if you're thrown in the fiery furnace, I'm the one that's in charge, not King Nebuchadnezzar. And he shows Nebuchadnezzar, you think you're in charge? I'll make you like an animal for 7 years. And when you wake up, you'll recognize who's really in charge. And he does. The whole book is about that. But the prophecies continue, that it's about the assurance that God is the one that's in control the whole time. Now, as far as trying to determine all these future events, this is one of the things that I struggle with when it comes to apocalyptic literature and future prophecies, is that so many people are intrigued and wrapped up in trying to figure them all out and mathify them, trying to figure out what's going on. In my lifetime, there's been many people that have come up and come to these numbers that are coming in Daniel and said they figured it out, they know when Jesus is coming, and it's amazing. He's coming this year. You know, and there was one leader that, I don't remember his name, he said he's coming, and he was like a Baptist preacher, and they would point out another verse. So I'm going to take another verse. Can you throw the verse up there from Matthew chapter 24? So Matthew 24 is also apocalyptic. It's Jesus talking to disciples when everything's going to be destroyed and the end times come and how horrible it's going to be. And Matthew chapter 24, verses 34, is that the first verse? Because I can't remember, I didn't write it down. Maybe I did. I did write it down, didn't I? Yeah, verse 34. So after the disciples are asking, all these terrible things are going to happen, Jesus says this interesting thing here. He says, truly I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all of these things have happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. These are the words of everything that's going to happen. And verse 36, he says, but about that day or hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but the Holy Father. So no one knows the day or the hours. So this Baptist preacher comes up and he says it's going to happen in September of a certain year, like 1980-something or whatever, 90-something. And they would read this verse to him. He goes, I don't know the day or hour, but I know the month and year. That's not the point Jesus was making, right? It wasn't like, I'm just going to hold the exact second from you, but you can figure everything else out. It's like you don't have a clue. Jesus told us that we're supposed to be ready no matter what. Like if you know what time that the thief is going to break in your house, you're going to be ready, right? But you don't know, and no thief is just going to say, hey, tomorrow night, 1 o'clock in the morning, I'm going to take out this window, come in and take all your jewelry. Matter of my sister, while she was sleeping in her house in Austin, Texas, somebody came in and stole like my grandmother's jewelry and things like that in her room while she was sleeping. But if she knew, she would have made sure the window was locked. Right? Or maybe not even gone to sleep. Probably not gone to sleep. Kind of hard to sleep when you know someone's breaking in your house. Right? So the thing is that he says you don't know. So you've got to always be ready. The numbers of, so that pastor, by the way, when he said he knew the month and the year, when that month and year came back, he goes, oh, I miscalculated. It's next year. There are whole cults and denominations that have formed because of this stuff. The Watchtower Society and your Jehovah's Witnesses, a lot of it comes from apocalyptic literature. The Seventh-day Adventists, I wouldn't call it a cult, but the Seventh-day Adventists, like, if you know the history, what happened was there was another Baptist pastor who figured out when Jesus was returning. everybody in his following gathered ready for Jesus to return. And they live like there's no tomorrow. Like, let's just rack up our credit cards because I don't have to pay it because Jesus is coming back tomorrow. I might as well get a full screen, flat screen TV now, and watch the Super Bowl because tomorrow he cometh. So what happens is they're abandoning everything, and then, voila, nothing happens. So he does recalculation. It comes out he's coming actually later. I miscalculated. Or I think it might have been actually his followers that convinced him. I think it was his followers that said, you miscalculated. And he's like, all right. He had a lot of steam knocked out of him because he was so convinced and when it didn't happen. So they waited the second time. Nothing happened again. His followers were so ridiculed that they didn't even want to walk the streets of the normal byways people would walk. They would cut through farm fields because they didn't like being made fun of. And there were two that were walking in a field, and they realized, hey, he actually was fulfilled. He didn't actually come to earth. He cleansed the temple in heaven. He did come back kind of sort of. He cleansed the temple in heaven's cleansed. And they just kept changing the story to fit. And the other Baptist guy who was like, it's this year I miscalculated. Later, when he didn't come back that year, then he said, well, it's kind of like Nineveh, He said 3 days are going to be destroyed, but every repented and he changed his mind. That's what happened. So what I said was really true, so keep buying my books. So the thing is that when anybody is trying to tell you, when you're looking in apocalyptic literature or future prophecies, there's only a couple things you really need to know. One is, nobody knows. Two, you just need to be ready. That's it. When I was going through my ordination, when I got out of seminary, and the pastor of my little church said, would you like us to ordain you? I'm like, that'd be good. I'd like that, And so we formed a ordination council with my professors and other pastors from the area that came around. They started to grill me theologically. And my professor thankfully said, why don't you write a theological paper for all your stance on issues so that they can read those and it'll save you a lot of questioning time. Great idea. Like, I really didn't want to write one more paper, but it made sense, right? Instead of sitting here at the firing squad, everybody firing questions at me, I'm going to say it's page 3, So I gave it to them all in advance so they would know. Now, one of the things that happened, you give your theology of who the person of Jesus is, the Trinity, God, the theology of man, the theology of the church, theology of sin, theology of whatever, you put all this stuff, theology of the Bible, you believe it's a inspired word of God, that kind of stuff. And they asked me, like, why don't you have an eschatological position? Why didn't you include that? And I said, because it doesn't matter, which shocked them. Because this is in the 90s. The tail end of people used to really argue about premillennial, amillennial, all this different stuff about the future events that we can't know. And the rapture, whether rapture, and if you don't know what a rapture is, like Jesus is going to come back, he's going to call us, we're going to join him in the clouds, and then all hell breaks loose on earth, and then the end of 7 years, we all come down and party. And but there's a lot of people that don't believe the rapture is going to happen. There's going to be 7 years of tribulation. You go through it, and you might get your head cut off, or you might be faithful through the whole way through. Don't know, but there are disagreements whether rapture happens. So this is what I said. I said, it doesn't matter. And they were like, it doesn't matter. Like, they spent 1,000 hours studying this stuff, making a big deal out of it. I said, okay, so this is what I think. If I don't believe in the rapture, and Jesus comes on the clouds and the rapture happens, is he going to say, you stay down there, you didn't believe in the rapture? I'm going to get raptured no matter what I believe about the rapture. Whether I believe in the rapture or not doesn't change whether I get raptured. And if I believe that the rapture is going to happen and it doesn't happen, it doesn't mean I'm going to be raptured with the only one, because I fully believed in the rapture. You're not called to believe in the rapture. You're supposed to be called to believe in the person of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, who died to save you. That's what we're supposed to believe. That's what's most important, right? And so the rapture didn't matter. Premillennial, postmillennial, millennial is the 1,000-year kingdom that Revelation talks about. So I said it just doesn't matter. Like, whether I'm premillennial or amillennial, doesn't matter. This is going to change future events. I'm going to live through them no matter what I believe about them. I just need to recognize what time I'm in when they happen. And they went, okay, check. So they took that answer. I'm glad, because then for years I just didn't have to go through any of the apocalyptic literature, because I was like, but it is good to understand it. The thing about it is, if God can predict all these things that you can look back on historically and know there was Alexander the Great, years before he was even born, predicted that he was going to take over the entire ancient world, and that he was going to die young, and 4 generals would come up and split his kingdom. And that out of that, many generations later, 200 years later, there would be Antiochus Epiphanes that would come up and invade the temple. The temple wasn't even built when Daniel was prophesying. He was still in Babylon. And here he's predicting that the temple's going to be rebuilt, and there's going to be something else in the Holy of Holies that's going to be sacrilegious. So all of this prophecy, you know, you can trust what's coming in the future because it's so accurate about the past, the future from the time it was written. Again, all it does is reinforce the reality that there's only one that you can trust, and that is God himself. That he is the one that's in control. That's what the book is about, is that you can trust him. He's in control. He always will be. That is the way you want to. You want to try and maybe figure out what you can in the apocalyptic literature. Some of it's easily known, like what the goat is, who the goat is, what the ram is. Some things are not going to be, and you say, okay, God, I'll wait. Just make sure, God, that if it's happening in my lifetime, you give me eyes to see it, so I can see it. And that's the best we can hope for in it. But in the end, the really best thing to hope for is I don't really have to worry about it because the end's already figured out. It's already taken care of. And all I need to do is trust him. That's all there is to it. All right? Will you pray with me? We have a baby dedication today, so we're finishing up a little earlier to give some time for the baby dedication. So will you pray with me? Father in heaven, thank you so much for your word. There are much that's in your word that is hard to understand, much that I don't understand. But I do know that I trust you. I trust that you're in control. And there's nothing that I can do to change that. I know that you're real. I know that you died for us. I know that you love us. So, Father, I pray that your Spirit would just give us the faith we need to face whatever comes, knowing that you'll always be in control and that you love us in the midst of all of it. In Jesus' name, amen.